you've touched a little bit. I've heard you talk about mold before, and you talked a little bit
Yeah.
about microbiome. Could you explain a little bit more about that, maybe? Because I think that's one that a lot of us are so unaware of, and maybe it being in our environment, and then once it's in our bodies, it seems pretty hard to get out.
Yeah, this, I have to say, I wish this were not a problem, but you can't ignore reality. Unfortunately, it's there. So, you know, we humans have made a lot of assumptions over the years. Of course, 100 years ago, the assumption was that it was okay to smoke because it really didn't do that much to you. Of course, that that became very clear that that was not okay, and that's impacted us in many ways. We didn't know that eating a ton of junk food was so bad for you until until people started doing the follow-ups and all the heart disease that people saw, and the high cholesterols and the hypertension and all this sort of stuff. And unfortunately, one of the assumptions that was made over the years is that we could build houses that people would live in, and it was not a big deal if you used wood that was moist, or if you had some water intrusion into your house. It happens to everybody. There's a little mold. Who cares? You can kind of coexist with mold. Well, sometimes you can, but unfortunately, in some people, their response to mold and the toxins that these molds produce. I mean, they're just trying to defend themselves. They're saying, "Hey, I'm being assaulted. Here's what I can do to respond." And so they make mycotoxins, and typically these things are to kill bacteria so that they can live when bacteria grow much faster than the molds. So the molds have to say, "Okay, how are we going to not get squeezed out here?" I mean, that's where penicillin came from, obviously. Well, unfortunately, some of these mycotoxins are very damaging to humans. Number one, they can cause Alzheimer's, they can cause cognitive decline, and I reported that way back in 2015. Number two, they can cause, in some cases, cancers. Number three, they can cause other diseases, basically of toxicity. And they can cause chronic inflammation. And so Dr. Richie Shoemaker described what he calls CIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome. So as I mentioned earlier, you can think of Alzheimer's as being two issues. Either you're failing with energetics or you're failing because you've got too much inflammation, or both. And for many people, it's some of both. And so one of the best ways, if you want to trigger, if I want to say, "Okay, Josh, I'm going to make your body be inflamed every day." Okay, I stick you in a house that's full of mold and mycotoxins, and they just keep triggering it. And unfortunately, another way to trigger this is to get COVID or to continue to get booster after booster after booster. And we do see, unfortunately, there's no, people always say I'm a pro-vaxxer or an anti-vaxxer, whatever they are. The reality is neither's perfect. There's no right and wrong answer here. For some people, one works better. For some people, the other works better. And so it's really a choice. And so the reality is you are triggering your immune system each time you have these various insults. And unfortunately, mycotoxins are a pretty common insult because they are so common in houses. And interestingly, some people seem to just handle them very well. They excrete them, they metabolize them, even though they're in fairly high levels, they do just fine. Other people are really in tough shape. And in fact, you see this all the time where there'll be, a couple of children and a couple of adults. One adult will get Alzheimer's, the other adult will be just fine. One of the children will get ADHD, another children will get repeated pulmonary problems or a rash. And they're all exposed to these mycotoxins. So unfortunately, they are relatively common contributors to cognitive decline. And when we treat people, we look for them, and if they are present, we make sure that we detox them over time, and they do better when you detox them. And if you don't help to reduce these, they don't get better they don't get as much better.
Wow. Yeah. And do you have suggestions for someone who, thinks they might have mold toxicity and to go and get testing, or some suggestions for that? Because I know two guys that got it and they nearly died, like
Yeah,
two separate guys. And it took them ages to find a
yeah,
proper doctor who was like, "Hey, dude, you have mold in your brain."
yeah,
And then to
yeah. It's
actually go through that detox process. And he spent like hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to
oh,
figure
I'm
this out.
sorry to hear that.
And then he finally found a doctor who was like, "This is it," and it
Yeah,
was thankfully set him on the right path, but it was
yeah.
arduous. And he was a skeleton,
And how's
basically,
he
at
doing
that
now?
point. He's so much better. Yeah,
Yeah.
that doctor
Okay. So they
thankfully set him
found
on the
it,
right path.
they
Yeah,
addressed it, and I mean
yeah,
that's the acid test. If you did you find it, replace it, and did they, or, deal with it, and did they actually get better? That's the key. So that's good news. And there are some really good mold groups in Australia. And in the U.S., the U.S. probably best to look at ICI, so ISEAI, which is a group started by Mary Ackerley, fantastic physician in Arizona. And there are others, Dr. Kat Toops, Dr. Mary Kay Ross, some really fantastic physicians who deal with these mycotoxins very effectively. So if you're in the US, check out ISEAI. If you're in Australia, check out the mold toxicity groups. There are a couple of really good ones there.